Taylor, thank you very much for being flexible with us today. There are the Penn State, West Virginia, Notre Dame and A&M, Georgia and Clemson. Your thoughts about which of those games, all three, very intriguing, but which one intrigued you the most?
Well, I would say after our own game, of course, the South Dakota State and Oklahoma State at 1 o'clock Central on ESPN+. No, I think the game that, for good reason, has all the eyeballs on it late in the day is Notre Dame traveling to A&M. I think the quarterback matchup is certainly intriguing. Another one that you didn't mention, but that I think is really intriguing is Miami and Florida. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that I'm looking at is Florida has just been almost written off before the season starts because of how difficult their schedule is this year. And it is. It maybe is the most difficult schedule we've seen in modern college football. But this is still a really talented Florida roster. There are key pieces and good pieces that are on that roster. And I don't think people realize it's just a 2-point edge right now for Miami. And that's a game that I think late in the day also, I'm going to be paying attention to that one as well, because it would not shock me at all if Florida won that game.
Well, it's one of the hardest places to play in the country at the Swamp. Miami classically has never played well there. And for some reason, I don't know what it is, Taylor, maybe you can describe this. Why does history matter through the decades where there's always teams or places that you struggle, even though necessarily the talent is not the same as when you struggled before?
Well, there's something to, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's something to, there are certain atmospheres that are just difficult to play in, and it doesn't really matter what the situation is. I know this is a neutral site and it's not exactly the same reference, but I always think about Red River rivalry, right? Texas and Oklahoma, every time they get together, anytime that spread gets more than 2 scores, you take the underdog, because that ends up being a 1-score game every time. And there are just certain rivalries and there's certain matchups where it feels like water finds its level and it doesn't really matter what the situation is. And for this year, especially for Miami, what I think about is Cam Ward. A lot has been made of his journey from FCS Incarnate Word to Washington State and everything he accomplished there. But this is still a first year in this system at Miami, and it's week 1. And if week 0 taught us anything, these are, for all intents and purposes, it's basically your first live scrimmage in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. It is more than a scrimmage because these games count and they matter. But for a lot of teams, especially in this portal era, it takes a little while to get their legs underneath them. And there will be more of these upsets and even teams that maybe pull it out like SMU did against Nevada. But there will be some surprises in week 1 because, again, you just have so many pieces that you're bringing in the portal era and trying to get them to gel really quickly.
One of those, early surprises last weekend was the Georgia Tech victory over Florida State, although there were some who anticipated that because of the fact that FSU has struggled against the Yellow Jackets. There was not elite quarterback play, I would say, in this game, Taylor. But what jumped out to you from Haynes King, from DJU, and from that game?
Well, I would say 2 things. I think there was too much hate given to DJU. I thought he played fine. He played about like what we expected from DJU. I think people, I'm not sure what they expected this new version of DJ Uiagalelei to be at Florida State, but they kept the ball off the sidelines. They tried to not have him drive the ball down the middle of the field where he traditionally struggles. He did not hit the chunk plays down the field, which would be my biggest criticism. But he wasn't the reason they got beat. Florida State got beat because they just weren't physical enough in the trenches. Georgia Tech pushed around both sides of the ball for most of that game up front. And especially down the stretch when Georgia Tech basically ran a 4-minute drill and ate up the rest of the clock, kicked the game-winning field goal. I thought that was really telling, just the physical edge that Georgia Tech had. The only thing that I will say, that just to defend Haynes King, because the numbers weren't gaudy by any means, but he had a couple throws in crunch time down the stretch that were really impressive. There was a 3rd down play. It was coming off a penalty. He's got pressure in his face. Looked like maybe in the past a play that he likely scrambles. He steps up, throws a crossing route with people in his face, and puts it on a dime. And it was a 1st down where they end up, it's a scoring drive for them. Otherwise, they would have been off the field. And I thought that was a really impressive. There was a couple throws that really stood out. And he played well enough for his team to win. He didn't have to put them on his back because, again, they ran the football really well against Florida State.
Taylor, you mentioned a game that I think is incredibly It's intriguing with defending national champion South Dakota State, Oklahoma State, obviously the consistency of Mike Gundy. And they got that shocker last year with South Alabama. But South Dakota State's really good. Give us a little bit of breakdown about what they can do and what Oklahoma State needs to be worried about.
Well, for Oklahoma State, it's a team that has the second most production in the country coming back. They bring back almost everyone on this roster. And the first part of last season, what was interesting is Ollie Gordon ends up being the Doak Walker winner at running back. He didn't touch the ball hardly at all in the first 3 weeks. Alan Bowman, their quarterback, they hadn't decided on him as a starter until week 4. So there was a lot that was up in the air for last year's Oklahoma State team, and that's why you saw them struggle so much. They right the ship. They end up having a good season. They make it to the Big 12 championship. But Mike Gundy and his staff, they've talked about it. It really felt like everything that they accomplished last year was building towards this year, where they have all of these key pieces are coming back. They're in their second year under Nordo on the defensive side, where they changed that 3-3-5 defense, and they struggled some last year implementing that. I feel like they've turned the corner. So for Oklahoma State, I think this is a team that you've seen them on a lot of projections as a team that makes it into the expanded playoff, and I think they're a favorite to be, at a minimum, getting back to the Big 12 championship against likely Utah. But on the other side, like you mentioned, South Dakota State hasn't lost a football game in 2 years. And when they did, they lost to a ranked Iowa and lost 7-3 in a game where they didn't give up a touchdown. It was 2 safeties and a field goal. So this is a team in South Dakota State that is used to winning. Their head coach has not lost a game yet as the head coach. And they bring in some key pieces, bring in their quarterback again. And there's a couple, the thing that I think most Oklahoma State fans are worried about is starting slow. And if South Dakota State builds up a lead and is able to play keep away, that's the biggest thing that I think Pokes fans are worried about.
Taylor, when thinking about the Big 12 championship and who could find their way there, I think Oklahoma State's obviously very much in that mix. Part of my hesitation is Alan Bowman, just because I think in comparison to some of the other quote-unquote contenders on paper, granted that could change when the actual games are played, I just don't know that he's as good as some of the other QBs. But am I disrespecting Alan Bowman's skill set, and are others as well? Because it kind of seems like some of what drags down the opinion of Oklahoma State is Alan Bowman, probably more than anything else.
Well, Alan Bowman's season was interesting last year because, like we talked about, he wasn't named the starter originally.
Yeah.
He goes back and forth. He's named the starter. He has this really solid chunk of the season, about 6 weeks in the middle of the year, where he plays really well. And then down the stretch, he has several interceptions in the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season, and one of which against they play BYU, have to go to double overtime to make it to the Big 12 championship. He didn't play that great, and I think that's Oklahoma State fans. If you go back and look at the end of last season, there is definitely some concern about what version of Alan Bowman do they get. Is it the consistent player that they had in the middle of the season last year, or is it the guy that had some turnover issues at the end of the year? The thing that's interesting, and what I'm looking for in week 1, Alan Bowman has said himself wanting to get better at pulling the trigger on downfield shot plays when he feels like it's there. When there are openings, maybe times where he didn't pull the trigger on a throw where it was right there in front of him and he was indecisive, those things jump out on film because there were throws to be made. And I think that was later in the year, especially when he was having the turnover issues. I don't think he trusted himself. I think he's certainly a top third of the league quarterback, or at least he has that potential to be that. But the turnover issues have to improve. Otherwise, they're not going to reach their potential. That said, the last thing I'll say on Oklahoma State, they are going to run the football with Ollie Gordon. They're going to try and get him 20 touches a game. And if they can run the football as effectively as they did last year and clean up turnovers for Bowman, this is going to be a really good Oklahoma State team.
Bowman can sling it, but yeah, the touchdown to interception ratio, 15-14, you can't have that. Is it sometimes, you kind of explained a little bit about what goes on. Is it also the fact that he's a gunslinger and he just thinks he can fit something through a tight hole?
I think there was certainly some of that. Some of it was trying to make plays off script, and it's just not there, and get rid of the football. And that was the piece that I think was most surprising, where last year he was a sixth-year quarterback. Now as a seventh-year quarterback, you typically don't see that from a guy that's been around college football for that long. But again, the thing to me is less so even the turnovers, because I do think just naturally that will improve this season. I expect him to turn the ball over less. But I'm really looking to see is he as indecisive in those critical downs as he was last year, because that was something that jumped out on tape on third down shot plays where maybe there's an opportunity to fit one in and he checks it down and they don't pick up the first down. Those plays were there last year that if Oklahoma State's going to take this next step, Alan Bowman has to hit those plays.
Taylor, how nice is it to have college football back?
Man, it is so nice to actually be talking about real football and not EA Sports, home field rankings and power rankings and all this stuff in the media days. I think week 0, I'll say it again, week 0 showed us the beauty of college football, and I think it's always been this way, but especially now, there are going to be some upsets in week 1. And I think I saw something earlier today that had all the betting favorites and all of these favorites across college football, so all the name brand teams, all the betting odds, just that these people are hammering the favorites. And it's funny because it happens every year. These teams sneak up and bite a heavy favorite in the butt. And again, it's the beauty of college football. And I promise you, we will see at least 1 or 2 of those in week 1.
Taylor, one more question, if you don't mind, about quarterback play. And we appreciate you again today and the weeks we have you. When you look at the SEC with yours and, of course, Carson Beck right now and many others, Jackson Dart, does Connor Wigman get enough attention? Do you like what he might bring to the table with A&M and a first? I don't know if it's his first full off season, but the coaching change and what he might, is he overlooked a little bit?
I think he's certainly overlooked right now, but just because I think there are, and I think it's fair, there's just a lot of uncertainty there. You've got these other pieces in the Big 12 that it feels like you have more clarity on what that quarterback spot is. You mentioned Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, a couple of the guys that are going to garner the bigger headlines. But Connor Wegman, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I got to see him for the first time up close at the Manning Passing Academy, and I get they're in shorts and t-shirts, shorts and t-shirts, just throwing the ball around. But he looked really good. He was on time. He was accurate. He looked the part. He carried himself the right way. And from everything that A&M has said coming out of camp, it would not surprise me. We talked about another team that it would not surprise me if they beat. I mean, they're favored right now against Notre Dame, but he's obviously going to be a big part of that. And I think, to your point, perception of him will change immediately if they beat Notre Dame and he plays even mediocre. But he is getting overlooked right now. I think the biggest thing is just it's an unknown for most of college football fans with Connor Wegman.
You pumped up? Craig asked you football season. You excited? I mean, this is it, right?
Absolutely. We got Kansas tomorrow night. They're opening up with Lindenwood, and so we've got them on Thursday night, and then we'll head down to Stillwater on Friday and get a couple Big 12 teams, get to see some of the better quarterbacks in the league in week 1. It's really fun sitting here going through prep. We're really fired up.
Man, the mystery surrounding the health of Jalen Daniels, you'll get to see that up close and personal. That's been an ongoing wonder, I think, around the league and around college football. So sounding like everything's in order for Lance Leipold and company as they get this thing started up?
Yeah, that's another team that, especially on the offensive side, a ton of production coming back. And Jalen Daniels, from everything that we've been told and everything that they've communicated to the media and everybody else, he's good to go. There are no issues. There's no health concerns. We'll obviously see tomorrow. He hasn't finished a full season before, but this is another team. To me, this is the biggest dark horse playoff team in the country because they're already ranked, so it's not that much of a dark horse team. But they've got the pieces in place right now to make a run at this conference. All 3 of their top pass catchers are back from a year ago. Devin Neal, one of the best running backs in the country, is back. They've got some good production on the defensive side as well that's coming back. I think they've got the best corners in the league on either side of the ball in Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. So, look, I think Kansas is a really good football team, but they are a playoff contender with Jalen Daniels at the helm. If he's not in, you're looking at, again, a ceiling of probably 8 or 9 wins like they were last year.
Thank you, buddy. Taylor McHargue with us. 2 games on his docket as he is very flexible, versatile, and does his thing with the games that he has, including KU, Lindenwood, and then the Oklahoma State, South Dakota State game, too.